The United Kingdom is set to return £1.2 million seized from former governor of Delta State, James Ibori, and his associates. Speaking at the agreement signing ceremony, Nigeria's Attorney General Abubakar Malami said negotiations have been concluded for the return of the loot in line with the understanding reached between both countries. The recovered funds will be used by the federal government for the completion of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, the second Niger Bridge, and the Abuja-Kano rail line, a decision the Delta State government does not subscribe to, describing it as a height of wickedness because the money belongs to the people of Delta State. The House of Representatives Minority Leader Ndidi Elumelu, in agreement, said the funds should be used to develop Delta State and no other government project.
Is Delta State government money. And we have no reason to now deprive Delta State government the opportunity of them using that money to further develop the state by using it to put infrastructural assets in place. This was why we all on the floor as a House of Representatives under Joint Task Force supported the motion, and a resolution was reached urging Minister of Finance, Minister of Justice to, as a matter of urgency, halt the idea of appropriating that money into other usage without recourse to Delta State government.
Here to speak on this is a senior advocate of Nigeria, Professor Itse Sagay, law teacher and chairperson of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption. Professor Itse Sagay, thank you very much for joining us. You are welcome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir, for joining us. Well, you are on record as having taken the same position as Honorable Elumelu and the Delta State government, that the money, the first tranche of it, £4.2 million, well, there's some controversy that it is about £6.4 million. You insist that that money legitimately belongs to Delta State and should go straight to Delta State. But the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice says the law that has been violated is federal law and that there is a framework in place which justifies the decision of the federal government to hold on to that money and to deploy it as it deems fit, even if the House of Representatives has resolved that that money should go to Delta State. Can you please further explain your position in this regard?
Okay. Well, I want to start with the fact that I've heard other arguments along that line. Some even say that the Proceeds of Crime Act of the United Kingdom supports the federal government, that the money can be seized, because that is seizure. And my response to that is that we stopped being dependent of the UK since October 1st, 1960. So their laws do not apply to us. Then the next thing they say is that there's a memorandum of understanding between Britain and this country that this money will be spent by the federal government on federal government projects. Again, my response to that is that the federal government may be legally bound to Britain as a result of this agreement, but the Delta State government is not part of it and is not legally bound, and its property cannot be seized to fulfill that agreement, because the issue is one of who owns the property. It's clear that it's property or assets that came from Delta State, from all the arguments, from all the evidence, clearly from Delta State. So if the federal government decides that it's going to spend it on federal projects without consulting Delta State, it amounts to seizing Delta State government money, regardless of its agreement with Britain, which doesn't affect the Delta State government. So, and there's nothing in the Constitution that empowers the federal government to do that at all. What it simply means is that the Delta State government is in a position to bring an action to recover its money from the federal government if it is spent without its consent and spent in a way that does not benefit the Delta State. My own suggestion about this, trying to understand what federal government's position is that federal government should be compelled to spend all the proceeds of this issue on Delta State federal projects. That's the least, that's the maximum concession Delta State government can make, because it is its money. And there's no question about that.
Well, but Prof, you recall that the Attorney General of the Federation made the point that Delta State was not part of the negotiations, that this was an issue between sovereign states rather than subnationals. And secondly, that the federal government is the victim in this matter. How is the federal government the victim? The other argument, counter-argument that has been offered is that Delta State has repeatedly said that there is no money missing from the coffers of Delta State. Why should a state government that says no money is missing, there is nothing called Ibori loot, benefit from the outcome of a memorandum of understanding between the UK and Nigeria?
Well, let's take the first one, where they are saying that the negotiations were between the federal government and the UK. And so it has to be. Delta State is a subnational body. It cannot internationally negotiate with the British government. So effectively, the federal government was negotiating with the British government on behalf of Delta State. So that's the position as far as that is concerned. What was the second issue you raised?
No,
Sorry,
the fact
I
that
forget very easily.
The Delta State government had repeatedly said that there's no money missing from the coffers of Delta State.
Yes.
So why, if they say no money is missing, why are they suddenly now saying the money that has been returned is theirs?
Okay, that's interesting. We must always remember that this is not an issue of governments alone, but of people. If the Delta State government denied it, knowing that it's from Delta, they denied it for whatever political reasons, that cannot affect the right of the people of Delta State to have the benefits of the assets that belong to them. So I don't think that is a feasible argument to use at all. At the end of the day, there's only one question. Where did this money come from? And if the matter is taken to court, you can even appoint an accountant to trace the source. Where did this money come from? That's the question. Once that is established, then that's the end of the story.
Well, Prof, some people have given the suggestion that one, maybe the federal government should take 20% of the money, given its role in how that money was returned. And that secondly, maybe perhaps there should be conditions attached, if the money must be returned to Delta State, as to how that money should be deployed, so that we don't have a case of relooting of the loot by certain factors in Delta State. What do you say to that?
Well, on the first one, I think that should be totally disregarded. The federal government should not want to benefit from doing its job as the external negotiator for all the states in the country. They shouldn't do that. There's no moral basis for that, and certainly no legal basis. So I think I will just completely disregard that. The second issue is more substantial. The question of relooting. That we have experienced that in this country so often that we cannot ignore it anymore. And I think everybody, even Delta State people, will be agreeable to an arrangement under which
if I may just come in here, we need to take a commercial break. I'm sorry, but we'll take that commercial break and we'll come back to you. Please stay with us. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. I still have with me in the studio Professor Bola Akintenewa, Director General, Bolitac Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director, Enough is Enough, and Professor Victor Ariole, Professor of French and Francophone Studies, University of Lagos. But our guest remains Professor Ishe Sagay, Professor of Law, legendary teacher of law, Chairman of the Presidential Committee, Advisory Committee Against Corruption. Prof, thank you for staying with us. Before we went on break, you were talking about relooting the loot. And I think that that's a line of thought that many of our viewers will be interested in.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
That's a very legitimate issue to raise. And because the experience we've had in this country has been very bad, extremely bad in the past. And what I would suggest in this case is that the federal government can lay down conditions which will involve close monitoring of how the money will be spent to ensure that it is spent genuinely and legitimately for the projects for which it is allocated. In fact, you may be aware that the federal government is also keenly monitored by international agencies when they are spending such recovered funds. So there's nothing wrong with that. I think that is a very sensible suggestion. Yes, I accept it. I accept that.
Well, Prof, moving beyond the Delta State and the so-called Ibori loot, as it were, I would like to have your thoughts, your comments on a number of other national issues. Now, in the course of trying to deal with the security situation in the country, the president of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, said that anybody found with AK-47, particularly in the forest, should be shot on sight. And he also went for that through an executive order to declare a no-fly zone over Zamfara State. Now, are these positions legal? Because there are indications that the president may just have unwittingly endorsed extrajudicial killing.
No. I think Nigerians are not seeing the larger picture. The president is actually concerned about the grave security situation we are facing. And what he said was a sort of emphasis on the fact that he is determined to take stern measures to end this insecurity. Now, let us look at what he actually said. If you shoot at sight anybody found carrying AK-47, of course, it must be somebody who is not in the security forces, who has no authority to carry it. And from my own understanding or knowledge of the security people, if your AK-47, the illegal AK-47 is lying on the ground and the culprit is standing, nobody will shoot him. The rifle, the AK-47 will be seized and he'll be arrested. Or if he's merely slinging it on his shoulder, they'll probably tell him to kneel down and then put his hand on his head and remove the AK-47 and arrest him. The point I'm trying to make is that the executors of these orders have some discretion based on their training. So they are not just going to shoot if it's not necessary. They will only shoot if it's a choice between their own safety and the safety of the man who is carrying the AK-47. So I don't think there's anything to worry about. I'm glad the president said it in that way because it means he's extremely, deadly serious about stamping out these crimes, and the security men in the country should feel that they have his backing in whatever tough measures they take to stamp out banditry and kidnapping and all the terrible things that are happening these days.
Well, Prof, I mean, many Nigerians thought that with the change of service chiefs, that the problem of insecurity in Nigeria would at least record some improvement and will be resolved. But since these new service chiefs in Nigeria took over, we haven't seen any kind of serious improvement. If anything, we've seen an escalation. Well, that's my opinion. But as the chairman of the Presidential Advisory Committee on corruption, are you not bothered that in the last 2 days, we've had this confusion about whether money is missing or money is not missing? The National Security Advisor saying that, well, it looks like money is missing, and then he reversed himself. Well, is this something that your committee may be willing to look into so that Nigerians can have great clarity as to whether or not funds are missing?
Okay. In the first place, it is my view that there's nothing irreconcilable between what the National Security Advisor first said and his reversal of his situation. He said he was quoted out of context. That's the first point. The second point is that PACAC does not investigate. That is still exclusively the preserve of the anti-corruption agencies. We engage in building up their capacity to do their job. And in certain cases, coordinating what they are doing. For example, ensuring that when one has information which is needed by the other in an investigation, that one should not sit on it but should pass it on. So we've created a central body where they meet and exchange facts and information. So our job really is more of a think tank. We provide them the tools and the ideas for doing their jobs more effectively, but we are not actually involved in direct security activity.
Well, Prof, it's good that you brought up PACAC. That is the committee that you head. There is a report that you said yes, people are not so willing anymore to blow the whistle. Why is that the case? And how much progress has your committee been able to make in helping the federal government to fight corruption? You say it's a think tank, but you were quoted as saying through the efforts of your committee, Nigeria has been able to recover close to 579 billion naira. But the whistleblowing part of it should be of interest. Why is it that Nigerians no longer want to blow any whistle? And how has that impacted upon the work of your committee working against corruption in Nigeria?
Well, first, let me say that the whole idea of whistleblowing is a PACAC idea. We introduced it to the agencies and to the Ministry of Finance. So that's one of our contributions. Now, why have things slowed down? It is possible, it is quite possible that people don't know it, not enough people know about what is happening in order to make them report. In other words, knowledge about this illicit stowing away of money or illegal acquisition of funds might have been reduced, because otherwise I don't see why else we will not be having more reports. There's definitely been a slowing down, no question about that. And my suspicion is that people don't have the information to give as much as it used to be, because it's good money, and every Nigerian likes to earn money. It's good money. If they had that information, they will come up with it.
Well, Prof, I'd like to take you up on two major issues related to law that occurred in the course of the week. The first is the protest by organized labor over the issue of whether or not the national minimum wage should be under the exclusive list or the concurrent list. And they are insisting that it should remain in the exclusive list under the Constitution. Otherwise, in their view, this will be a declaration of war against the Nigerian worker. We'll take a short break, Prof, and then we'll come back to you. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Our guest is still Professor ITSE Sagay, Professor of Law, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, and Chairman of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, PACAC, in Nigeria. Professor Sagay, thank you for staying with us. Before we went on break, I had asked you a question about the protest organized by Labour, the TUC and the NLC across Nigeria this week with regard to the attempt by the House of Representatives to move the national minimum wage from the exclusive list to the concurrent list. And they say that that's an attack against Nigerian workers. What do you think?
Yes, it's a clash of two major interests. The first interest is that a state's salary structure should be determined by the income of that state, by the economic power of that state. That is what the House of Reps people are pressing. The Labour believes that there should be a national minimum wage so that states that would normally want to pay very low wages will at least meet that national level. And they back this up not just by the Constitution, which faces them, but by the ILO, International Labour Organization, which has passed, let me call it a decree, that's not the exact word, in which it has enshrined that idea that every country must have a national minimum wage. That's what they are clinging to. So that's the clash. Many of us privately believe states should be allowed to negotiate the wages of their workers because all states don't have the same level of funds. But I can also understand the position of Labour because they fear. Now we have 30,000 a month. They fear that if that is allowed, some states may go as low as 10,000 a month and say that is what we can afford. So there's some point in their argument. And my suggestion is that all the governors, the president, and the Labour leaders should sit down and discuss this matter and agree on a modus vivendi. In other words, an amount that's never too high for the financially weak states, at the same time not too low for the average labor man working in the city or even in the rural areas.
Well, Prof, another issue relating to law, which we had cause to discuss on another program this week, is about the National Consultative Front, NC Front, trying to come up with a people's constitution. I had pointed out to two of the members of that front who appeared on another program, The Morning Show, that this is not new. But each time I discuss that, I always remember that you wrote a famous essay on the 1999 Constitution, in which you pointed out over 60 defects in that 1999 Constitution, which came into effect under Decree 24, I guess, I hope I remember, of 1999. Now, this whole idea of people coming up and saying they will give Nigeria a people's constitution without regard for the rights of the National Assembly, is it possible?
It's possible with the consent of the National Assembly. That's the way I would put it. We could have, technically, the National Assembly is the only body empowered to go on such an exercise under the present Constitution. But if there's a national consensus, there could be constitutional conferences, or whatever you may call it, that will bring in a people's constitution which would then be channeled to the National Assembly to adopt. Because otherwise, the National Assembly is going to challenge it under the present Constitution. And our courts are bound to enforce the provisions of the Constitution. So we are really in a bind. And the reason behind it is that this Constitution was put together by people, a narrow group of people. It was never exposed to the rest of the country for debate. The military held it to their chest because they thought it suited them. And then, even when the first elections were conducted in 1999, the Constitution was not yet out. So it was a private, secret Constitution, which was not open for national debate. If that had happened, all these obnoxious provisions would not be there. For example, there is no provision for a referendum in this Constitution. If we had one, that would have solved a lot of problems, but there's no such provision. And when you suggest that we can still go ahead, those who want to maintain the status quo will say you can never, because there's no provision for it, and that you cannot take any step that is not provided by the Constitution. So we have a big problem. And the only solution is that of goodwill and good faith, in which all the institutions will agree that there's need for a very major change to the Constitution and play their part in the process.
Well, Prof, before we wrap this up, finally, I'd like to ask you a personal question. COVID-19, this is the main subject of the world at the moment. Will you take the COVID-19 jab? Have you taken it? Or will you change your mind one way or the other, considering the fact that the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the type we have in Nigeria, has become a subject of controversy in Europe?
Yes, let me say straight away, I'm anxious to take the vaccine. But I am looking forward to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I have nothing against the AstraZeneca vaccine, but I learned reliably that for people 65 and above, that is people within my category, it is not ideal.
Prof, you are in the 80 and above category.
For the Johnson & Johnson.
We thank God for your life. Please carry on, sir.
Thank you.
Please carry on, sir. Okay, well, thank you very much.
So, yes, and luckily, Nigeria is going to import the Johnson & Johnson, which is suitable for all ages. And it has the extra advantage that it's only one jab. You are vaccinated once, and that's the end of the story. You don't come back 21 days later to take another jab. So all told, I think I would rather wait for that one.
Okay. Well, on that note, we would like to thank you very much, Professor ITSE Sagay, for joining us today on This Is Live, the Sunday Talk Show. Thank you very much.